She was invisible. That was the kindest word anyone had ever used to describe Linnea. The Thornridge pack called her the Phantom, the Waste, the Broken One. An Omega so weak she couldn't shift properly, her wolf choked silent by years of starvation and cruelty. She scrubbed floors until her knuckles bled. She mended torn clothes in freezing servant quarters. She ate garbage scraps behind the kitchens, grateful for moldy bread. But Linnea had a secret that could get her killed. Every night, when the moon climbed high and the compound fell into uneasy sleep, 6 tiny shadows followed her into the forbidden forest. They moved through snow without sound, their eyes glowing like captured stars. They weren't strays. They weren't abandoned rogues. They were impossible. And when she knelt before them in the dead zone where no wolf dared tread, they bowed. Not from fear. Not from training. From recognition. Their small heads pressed into frozen earth, trembling with something ancient. Something that lived in blood and bone and prophecy. Linnea didn't understand it. She was nobody. She had no power, no rank, no wolf strong enough to command a field mouse, let alone 6 creatures whose eyes burned with colors that shouldn't exist. But something deep in her chest responded every time. A warmth. A pull. A connection she couldn't name and didn't dare question. Beneath her torn sleeves, wrapped in filthy bandages, a crescent moon mark glowed silver whenever moonlight touched it. She told anyone who asked that it was an old burn, a kitchen accident, nothing worth examining. She lied, because that mark was the reason she had no memory before age 12, the reason her wolf wouldn't wake, the reason she felt like a stranger in her own skin, and the reason Alpha King Theron had been watching her for 3 nights straight. The most dangerous predator in the Northern Kingdom stood motionless in the darkness beyond the trees, tracking her scent, observing her rituals, studying the way those impossible pups bowed before a wolf who should mean nothing. She thought no one was watching, but the most dangerous wolf in the realm had been following her every night, and what he was about to discover would shatter the lies of an entire kingdom. If you're already hooked, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, this story gets intense. The Thornridge territory was a cruel place to be weak. The pack occupied the frozen highlands where winter strangled the land 9 months out of every year. The mountains rose like jagged fangs against an iron sky. The wind didn't just blow, it bit, tearing through clothing and flesh with equal contempt. The cold was so brutal it cracked skin, split lips, turned fingertips black if you stayed outside too long. And mercy? Mercy didn't exist here. Alpha Ragnar ruled Thornridge with silver and violence. His warriors were battle-scarred brutes who settled disputes with teeth and claws. His betas were corrupt, their pockets lined with smuggled goods and blood money. His gammas enforced laws that only protected those strong enough to matter. And his omegas? They were less than nothing. Linnea had learned that truth the hard way. She'd been brought to Thornridge when she was 12 years old, more corpse than child. She'd been found collapsed in the snow 3 miles from the border, her clothes soaked in blood that wasn't hers, her skin blue from exposure, her eyes vacant. She had no memory of how she'd gotten there. No recollection of family or home or pack. Just fragments that felt more like nightmares than memories. A woman's voice singing a lullaby. The smell of jasmine and wood smoke. Fire. Screaming. Then nothing. She'd woken in the servant quarters with a name whispered in fevered dreams, Linnea, and a crescent moon scar carved into the inside of her left wrist. It glowed faint silver whenever the moon was full, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Ragnar had taken her in. Not from kindness. Never kindness. Omegas were useful labor, and a child too traumatized to remember her past wouldn't ask questions or demand better treatment. He was right. For 11 years, Linnea had survived by following 3 rules. Keep your head down. Never speak unless spoken to. Hide the mark. The mark was the most important rule. She kept it wrapped in strips of cloth torn from old blankets, stained brown with age and grime. When anyone asked, which was rare because most wolves didn't acknowledge her existence, She told them it was an old burn from a kitchen accident, a careless moment near boiling water. No one questioned it. No one cared enough to look. But Linnea felt it. Every day. Every night. The mark throbbed with heat during full moons, ached during new moons, hummed with energy she couldn't access. It felt like a locked door inside her chest. Like something vital had been sealed away, and she'd lost the key. Her wolf had never awakened. Most wolves experience their first shift during adolescence, usually between 12 and 15. Linnea was 23 now, and her wolf remained silent. Dormant. Some wolves whispered she didn't have one at all. That she was broken. Defective. Maybe they were right. Her days bled together in a gray haze of exhaustion and hunger. She woke before dawn in the servant quarters, a drafty stone room she shared with 4 other omegas who pretended she didn't exist. She dressed in the same threadbare clothes she'd worn for 2 years, a tunic that had belonged to a beta's mate before it was discarded, pants with holes in both knees, boots held together with twine. Her coat was the worst. It was thin wool, frayed at the edges, offering almost no protection against the cold that gnawed at her bones. But it was all she had. She'd found it in the garbage heap 3 winters ago, and despite the holes and stains, it was warmer than nothing. She scrubbed floors until her knuckles bled. She hauled firewood until her back screamed. She mended clothes by candlelight until her eyes burned. And when the pack ate, roasted meat, fresh bread, hot stew, she waited. She always waited. After everyone finished, after the platters were cleared and the dining hall emptied, she was allowed to eat the scraps. Gristle stripped from bones. Bread crusts too hard to chew. Congealed fat scraped from plates. She ate from a wooden bowl behind the kitchens, crouched in the snow, shoveling food into her mouth before anyone changed their mind. The hunger was constant. It had become background noise, a dull ache she barely noticed anymore. Some days were worse than others. Some days she felt lightheaded, her vision swimming, her hands shaking. But complaining meant punishment. And punishment meant Ragnar's silver whip. She'd felt it twice. Once when she was 14, for breaking a plate. Once when she was 19, for speaking out of turn. The whip smelled like ozone and blood, and the scars it left never fully healed. Silver poisoning made sure of that. Even now, for years later, the marks on her back burned when it rained. So, she kept her head down. She stayed invisible, and she survived. But 2 months ago, everything changed. It was late February, the coldest night of the year. Linnea had been sent to dispose of kitchen waste near the frozen river that marked the southern border. The task was meant to be punishment, hauling rotting food in sub-zero temperatures, but she didn't complain. Punishment meant leaving the compound. And leaving the compound meant freedom, even if only for an hour. She'd been trudging through knee-deep snow, dragging a sack of garbage behind her, when she heard it. A sound. Soft. Weak. Barely louder than the wind. Whimpering. She'd stopped, breath fogging the air, and listened. There it was again, coming from beneath the collapsed stone bridge that spanned the river. Linnea shouldn't have investigated. She should have finished her task and returned to the compound. Curiosity was dangerous for omegas. But something pulled her forward. That same warmth in her chest. That same inexplicable tether. She'd found them huddled in a wooden crate that had shattered against the rocks. 6 wolf pups, too young to shift, their bodies trembling violently from cold. Their fur was matted with mud and ice. Their ribs jutted out like broken instruments. They should have been dead, but they weren't. When Linnea knelt beside them, they'd lifted their heads. 6 pairs of glowing eyes locked onto hers, amber, blue, green, gray, violet, gold, colors that shouldn't exist in nature. And they'd bowed. Every single one pressed their tiny heads to the frozen ground, their bodies shaking with something that felt like devotion. Linnea's breath had caught. She'd looked around, certain they were bowing to someone else. Some stronger wolf. Some alpha passing by. But there was no one. Just her. Just the wind. Just the impossible. She should have left them. She should have reported them to Ragnar. Unclaimed pups were either culled or sold. That was pack law. But she couldn't. Something in their eyes stopped her. Desperation. Recognition. Trust. So she'd wrapped them in her coat, the only warm thing she owned, and smuggled them into the dead forest. She'd built them a den in the hollow of an ancient oak tree, far from the compound, deep in the zone where no wolf dared tread. The dead forest was cursed, they said. Haunted. Wolves who entered never returned. But Linnea felt safe there. Safer than she'd ever felt in Thornridge. She'd named the pups over the following weeks. Asher, amber-eyed, the brave one who always greeted her first. Kale, blue-eyed, the watcher who studied everything with cautious intelligence. Mira, green-eyed, the smallest but fiercest, quick to bare her teeth at shadows. Oren, gray-eyed, the gentle healer who licked her hands and pressed against her legs. Sable, violet-eyed, the clever strategist who figured out how to open the food bundles. Zephyr, gold-eyed, the wild one who couldn't sit still, always exploring. They grew stronger under her care. But they never stopped bowing. Every night, when she arrived with stolen food, they dropped to the ground in perfect synchrony, their glowing eyes fixed on her with reverence that made her chest ache. She didn't understand it. She was nobody. She had nothing. But they acted like she was everything. So Linnea became a thief. She stole sausages from the kitchens, half-rotted vegetables from the root cellar, stale bread no one would miss, cheese rinds scraped from cutting boards. She hid the food in her pockets, in her sleeves, beneath her tunic. She moved through the compound like a ghost, invisible and silent, her heart pounding with fear and purpose. If Ragnar caught her stealing food, the punishment wouldn't be the whip. It would be execution. But tonight, like every night, she took the risk. Because those 6 impossible pups were the only thing in her miserable life that felt like hers. The only creatures who saw her, who needed her, who made her feel like she mattered. She stuffed 3 bruised sausages and a hunk of stale bread into her coat pockets and slipped out the kitchen door into the frozen night. The moon was nearly full, hanging low and bloated in the sky. Her wrist throbbed beneath the bandages. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the compound walls, golden eyes watched her leave. But Linnea wasn't stealing for herself. She was stealing for something far more dangerous. And if Ragnar ever found out, the punishment wouldn't be a beating. It would be execution. The dead forest earned its name, honestly. Nothing grew here. The trees were skeletal, their bark blackened as if scorched by invisible fire. The ground was hard and lifeless, covered in a layer of frost that never melted, even in summer. The air tasted metallic, like old blood. Most wolves believed the land was cursed, that something terrible had happened here centuries ago, and the earth remembered. Linnea didn't care about curses. The dead forest was the only place she felt safe. She moved quickly through the trees, her breath coming in short white bursts. The compound was a mile behind her now, far enough that no patrol would hear or scent her. The moon hung fat and luminous overhead, turning the snow blue-silver. Her wrist burned beneath the bandages, the mark pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She reached the ancient oak tree at the forest's heart. It was massive, older than the pack itself, its trunk split down the middle as if struck by lightning. The split had created a hollow space inside, large enough to shelter 6 small bodies. Linnea had lined the interior with moss and dried grass, stolen blankets, anything soft she could find. She stopped at the entrance and crouched low, her knees sinking into snow. She didn't call out. She never needed to. A soft rustle came from inside the hollow. Then silence. Then the sound of small paws padding across frozen earth. One by one, they emerged. Asher came first. He always did. His fur was dark gray, almost black, and his eyes glowed amber, like captured firelight. He was the brave one, the protector, the first to investigate any sound or scent. He stepped out of the den with his head high, scanning the darkness before his gaze locked onto Linnea. And then he bowed. His front legs folded, his chest pressed to the ground, his head lowered until his nose touched snow. His amber eyes never left hers. Linnea's breath caught, just like it did every time. Kale emerged next. His fur was silver-white, almost ghostly in the moonlight, and his eyes burned blue like winter sky at dawn. He was the watcher, cautious and calculating. He studied Linnea for a long moment before following Asher's lead, dropping low in submission. Mira tumbled out third, small and fierce, her green eyes blazing with energy that didn't match her size. She was the fighter, quick to bare tiny teeth at shadows, always ready to defend her siblings. She bowed with less grace than the others, her body wiggling with barely contained excitement. Orphaned followed, gentle and soft. His gray eyes were warm, full of affection that made Linnea's chest ache. He was the healer, always licking her hands, pressing against her legs, offering comfort without words. He bowed slowly, deliberately, as if the gesture carried weight. Sable stepped out with measured precision. Her violet eyes were sharp, intelligent, always observing and calculating. She was the strategist, the problem solver, the one who figured out how to open food bundles and hide from the cold. She bowed with perfect posture, every movement intentional. Zephyr burst out last in a flurry of movement. His gold eyes gleamed with wildness, restless energy that couldn't be contained. He was chaos, curiosity, recklessness. He couldn't sit still for longer than a few seconds, always exploring, always pushing boundaries. Even his bow was impatient, quick, before he bounded forward. All 6 of them, heads lowered, eyes glowing, trembling with something that felt like worship. Linnea's throat tightened. She reached out with shaking hands, and they swarmed her. Asher pressed against her right side, Kale against her left. Mira climbed into her lap. Orphaned licked her wrist through the bandages. Sable nuzzled her shoulder. Zephyr bounced around them all, yipping softly. That warmth flooded her chest again. That pull. That inexplicable tether that made her feel like she belonged to them, and they belonged to her. She didn't understand it. She was nobody. She had no power, no strength, no wolf capable of commanding respect. But these 6 impossible creatures acted like she was their world. Linnea blinked back tears and unwrapped the food from her pockets. 3 sausages, bruised and half-frozen. A chunk of stale bread. A piece of cheese rind she'd scraped from a cutting board. It wasn't much. It was never enough. She spread the food on her coat, which she'd laid flat on the ground like a makeshift blanket. The pups descended on it immediately, their tiny jaws tearing into meat and bread with desperate hunger. Linnea watched them eat, her heart breaking and mending at the same time. She'd found them 2 months ago on the coldest night of the year. She'd been hauling garbage to the frozen river, punishment duty, when she heard whimpering beneath the collapsed stone bridge. She should have ignored it. Should have finished her task and returned to the compound. But she couldn't. She'd found them in a shattered wooden crate, half submerged in icy water. 6 wolf pups, too young to shift, their fur matted with mud and blood. Their bodies were so cold they'd stopped shivering. Their eyes were open but vacant. They should have been dead. But when Linnea knelt beside them, when her shadow fell across their tiny bodies, they'd stirred. Their eyes had opened, amber, blue, green, gray, violet, gold, and focused on her with impossible clarity. And they'd bowed. Even then, even half-frozen and starving. They'd pressed their heads to the frozen ground and trembled. Linnea had wrapped them in her coat and carried them into the dead forest. She'd built them a den. She'd stolen food. She'd visited them every night, no matter how exhausted or hungry or cold she was. Because no one else would. Because if she'd turned them over to Ragnar, he would have culled them. Or worse, sold them to hunters or pit fighters. Unclaimed pups were worthless. Disposable. So Linnea became a thief. A liar. A criminal. And a mother in everything but blood. She didn't know where they'd come from. They had no pack scent. No markings. No collars or brands. Just those glowing eyes that shouldn't exist and a bond she couldn't explain. Zephyr finished eating first and bounded over to her, climbing onto her lap beside Mira. Orin pressed his head against her knee. Sable curled up at her feet. Kale rested his chin on her thigh. Asher sat at attention beside her, still watching the darkness. Linnea ran her fingers through their fur, feeling their heartbeats, their warmth, their trust. This was the only time she felt real. The only time she felt seen. But it couldn't last. It never lasted. She glanced at the moon. It was late. Too late. If she didn't return soon, someone might notice. Might ask questions. She kissed each pup on the head, whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep, and stood. They didn't follow. They knew better. Instead, they retreated into the hollow of the oak tree, their glowing eyes watching her from the darkness. Linnea turned and walked back through the dead forest, her heart heavy, her wrist burning. She didn't know that someone else had followed her scent into the trees. Someone whose presence alone could make alphas kneel. Someone who'd been watching from the shadows for the past 3 nights, studying her, questioning everything he thought he knew about the massacre that destroyed his bloodline. But tonight, someone else had followed her scent into the forest. Someone whose presence alone could make alphas kneel. And he had been watching from the shadows for the past 3 nights. Before we continue, if you're already hooked on Linnea's story, do me a huge favor and smash that like button. It tells YouTube to share this with more werewolf lovers like you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what happens when the Alpha King finally confronts her? Let's just say you do not want to miss it. Now, back to the story. 2 days later, the Thornridge compound became a nightmare. The news arrived at dawn. Alpha King Theron was coming. No warning. No formal request. Just a message delivered by a royal courier who disappeared before Ragnar could ask questions. The compound exploded into chaos. Ragnar roared orders from the main hall, his face purple with rage and panic. Warriors scrambled to hide crates of smuggled weapons, silver bullets, wolfsbane grenades, enchanted blades, contraband that would earn execution if discovered. Betas scrubbed blood off walls, covered claw marks, burned documents. Gammas patrolled the perimeter with orders to kill anything suspicious. And the Omegas? They were shoved into the kitchens and cellars, locked away like dirty secrets. Linnea spent the entire day on her knees scrubbing the great hall floor. Her hands were raw and bleeding, the water in her bucket so cold it numbed her fingers. Around her, wolves moved in frantic patterns, shouting, cursing, slamming doors. She kept her head down and worked, but her mind was in the dead forest. She hadn't been able to visit the pups in 2 nights. The perimeter was on lockdown. Guards patrolled every exit. No one was allowed beyond the walls without direct permission from Ragnar, and Omegas didn't get permission for anything. The pups would be starving, frightened, waiting for her. Linnea's chest ached with guilt and helplessness. She scrubbed harder, as if the motion could erase the images in her head. Asher pacing at the den entrance, Mira whimpering, Zephyr venturing too far into the forest alone. What if they left the den looking for food? What if guards found them? What if Ragnar found them? Her wrist throbbed beneath the bandages, the mark burning hotter than usual. She pressed her hand against her chest, trying to steady her breathing. Just one more night. Once the king leaves, the lockdown will lift. I'll bring them extra food. I'll make it right. She had to believe that. Beta Corn strode past and kicked her bucket, spilling icy water across the stones. Move faster, waste. The floor better shine bright enough to blind when the king arrives. Linnea didn't respond. She soaked her rag and kept scrubbing. By sunset, the compound was unrecognizable. Every surface gleamed. Every wolf was bathed, dressed in formal pack attire, leather and fur, silver clasps, clan markings on display. Warriors stood at attention in perfect formation. Betas lined the main courtyard. Gammas flanked the gates. And the Omegas? They were herded to the back of the courtyard, pressed against the far wall, told in no uncertain terms to stay silent and invisible. Linnea stood among them, shivering in her threadbare coat. The other Omegas kept their distance as always.
She was used to it.
used to being the ghost even among ghosts. The sun sank behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of blood and gold. The temperature dropped further. Linnea's breath fogged the air. Her wrist burned. Then the silence came. It wasn't gradual. One moment, the compound was filled with the sounds of nervous movement, boots on stone, muttered conversations, the rustle of clothing. The next moment, nothing. Absolute silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Linnea looked up and saw them. A convoy of black vehicles rolled through the iron gates. They weren't normal cars. They were armored, reinforced, built like weapons on wheels. They moved in perfect formation, slow and deliberate, flanked by wolves in tactical gear who moved with the precision of trained killers. The lead vehicle stopped in the center of the courtyard. The door opened. Alpha King Theron stepped out. The world seemed to tilt. He was massive, easily 7 feet tall, broad-shouldered, his frame radiating power that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with presence. He wore a long black coat lined with silver fur that caught the fading light. His hair was dark, swept back from a face carved from stone, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and a scar that ran from his left temple down to his jaw like a lightning strike frozen in flesh. But it was his eyes that made Linnea's knees buckle. Golden, molten, burning with intelligence and fury, and something ancient. The air grew heavier. It wasn't metaphor. The weight of his alpha aura pressed down on every wolf in the compound like gravity had suddenly increased tenfold. Linnea felt it in her chest, her lungs, her bones. Felt the instinctive urge to drop to the ground and bare her throat. She wasn't the only one. Around the courtyard, wolves lowered their heads. Some dropped to one knee. Even Ragnar's betas looked pale. Ragnar himself stood at the base of the stairs leading to the great hall, dressed in ceremonial furs, his silver whip coiled at his belt. He bowed so low his forehead nearly touched his knees. "King Theron," Ragnar said, his voice thick with false warmth. "We are deeply honored by your presence. Welcome to Thornridge. If you'll allow me to spare me." Theron's voice was low, a rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Every word carried weight. He walked past Ragnar without a glance, his boots crunching on snow. His golden eyes swept the courtyard, taking in the warriors, the betas, the gammas. Assessing. Calculating. "I'm here because your pack has been harboring illegal weapons shipments," Theron said, his tone flat and cold. "Silver-tipped ammunition. Wolfsbane extract. Enchanted blades forged in blood magic. All of it purchased from rogue hunters. All of it illegal under Northern Kingdom law." Ragnar's face went white. "My king, I assure you, there's been a misunderstanding. Don't insult me." Theron stopped walking. He stood in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by Ragnar's wolves, utterly unbothered. His gaze swept the crowd again. And then it stopped, locked onto the back row, locked onto Linnea. She felt it like a physical blow. Her breath caught. Her vision blurred at the edges. Her heart slammed against her ribs, so hard she thought they might crack. "Don't look at him. Don't look." Submission. Always submission. She dropped her gaze to the ground, staring at the snow beneath her boots, every muscle in her body screaming at her to run. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Theron stared at her for 5 seconds. 5 eternal, agonizing seconds. Then he turned back to Ragnar. But his expression had changed. His jaw was tight. His eyes narrowed. "Your perimeter," Theron said slowly, each word deliberate, "smells like pups." Ragnar blinked. "My king. Young wolves. 6 of them. Hidden beyond your borders." The fierce wet smell intensified. Ragnar's hands clenched at his sides. "Impossible. We have no pups in the territory. They must be strays from the eastern forests. Strays don't have that bloodline." The words fell like stones into water. Silence rippled outward. Wolves exchanged glances. Ragnar opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I don't understand, my king." "What bloodline?" Theron's head snapped to the side. His nostrils flared. He inhaled deeply, his entire body going still. Then his gaze cut back to Linnea. This time, he didn't look away. Linnea felt like she was drowning, like the ground had opened beneath her, and she was falling. The mark on her wrist burned so hot, she bit her lip to keep from crying out. Theron's eyes narrowed further. His jaw clenched. He stared at her like he was trying to see through her skin, through her bones, into her soul. What does he see? What does he know? Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her vision swam. Her wolf, silent for 23 years, stirred for the first time. Not waking, just shifting. Like something locked in a cage had heard a key turn. Theron took a step forward. Ragnar moved to intercept him. "My king, if there's something specific you need." "Yes." Theron's voice cut through the air like a blade. He raised one hand and pointed directly at Linnea. Every wolf in the compound turned to look. Dozens of eyes locked onto her. The other Omegas beside her took a step back, leaving her exposed, alone. Linnea's knees almost gave out. And then King Theron did something that made every wolf in the compound hold their breath. He pointed directly at Linnea. "You," he said, his voice cutting through the crowd like a blade. "Step forward." Linnea's legs refused to obey. "Step forward." The command echoed in her skull, but her body had turned to stone. Around her, the other Omegas melted away, putting distance between themselves and whatever was about to happen. She stood alone against the wall, exposed, every eye in the compound locked on her. "I said step forward." Theron's voice was quieter this time, but somehow worse. There was no anger in it. No impatience. Just absolute certainty that he would be obeyed. Linnea's feet moved without her permission. She stumbled forward, her vision blurring at the edges. The crowd parted around her like she carried plague. Betas turned away. Gammas watched with cold curiosity. Warriors looked through her as if she didn't exist. She crossed the courtyard in what felt like hours, but was probably seconds. Her boots crunched on snow. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. Her wrist burned so hot beneath the bandages she wanted to scream. She stopped 3 feet from Theron and dropped her gaze to the ground. Up close, he was even more terrifying. He radiated power like a furnace radiated heat. His presence pressed down on her, made her wolf, silent for 23 years, cower deeper into whatever cage held it prisoner. Theron studied her for a long moment. She could feel his gaze like a physical weight. Then he spoke, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Look at me." Linnea's throat closed. Omegas didn't look alphas in the eye. It was the most fundamental rule. Breaking it meant punishment. "Look at me." She lifted her head slowly, her entire body shaking. Golden eyes met hers. They weren't cruel. They weren't cold. They were searching, desperate, looking for something she didn't understand. "Show me your wrist," Theron said. Linnea's heart stopped. "My king, I don't." "Show me." She shook her head, words failing. If he saw the mark, if anyone saw the mark, everything would end. The pups would be discovered. She'd be executed. The only thing in her miserable life that mattered would be destroyed. Theron took a step closer. He didn't touch her, but she felt trapped anyway. "You can show me willingly," he said quietly, "or I can give it as an order, and your body will obey whether you want it to or not. Your choice." Linnea's hands trembled as she reached for the bandages wrapped around her left wrist. The cloth was old, stained brown with age and grime. She'd worn it for 11 years. It was armor, protection. The only thing standing between her and whatever truth she'd been running from since she was 12. She unwrapped it slowly, each loop of fabric feeling like peeling away skin. The mark was revealed inch by inch. A crescent moon scar, jagged and silver, carved into the inside of her wrist. It glowed. Not brightly, but enough. Enough to catch moonlight. Enough to pulse with faint light that matched her heartbeat. The crowd gasped. Theron went completely still. For 5 long seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. Then Theron whispered, "Impossible." His voice cracked on the word. He reached out slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal, and took her wrist gently in his massive hand. His touch was warm, careful. His thumb traced the edge of the mark, and Linnea felt a jolt of energy shoot up her arm, into her chest, straight to the place where her wolf should be. Something stirred, something buried, something waking. Theron's jaw clenched. His eyes shone with moisture. "Where did you get this?" "I don't know," Linnea whispered. "I've always had it. Since I was..." 6 howls tore through the night. High-pitched, desperate, coming from the forest. Linnea's head snapped up.
No. No, no, no.
The trilene exploded with movement. 6 small shapes burst from the darkness, moving faster than should be possible for creatures their size. They ignored the guards, ignored the warriors, ignored the convoy of armored vehicles and the king's soldiers. They ran straight toward Linnea. Asher led the charge, his amber eyes blazing. Kale and Mira flanked him. Orin and Sable followed close behind. Zephyr brought up the rear, yipping frantically. "No," Linnea breathed. "Please no." The pups reached her and skidded to a stop. And then, in perfect synchrony, they bowed. All 6 of them dropped to the ground, their heads pressed into snow, their glowing eyes, amber, blue, green, gray, violet, gold, fixed on her with absolute reverence. The compound erupted in shocked whispers. Ragnar's face went bone white. Theron staggered back a step, his hand releasing Linnea's wrist. His eyes were wide, locked on the pups. His mouth opened.
Closed.
Opened again. Then he dropped to one knee, his massive frame folded, his hand reaching out toward the pups with fingers that shook. "Asher," he whispered. The amber-eyed pup's ears twitched.
Kale.
Mira. Orin. Sable. Zephyr. Each pup turned their head slightly as their name was spoken, recognition flickering in their impossible eyes. Theron's voice broke. "You're alive." He looked up at Linnea, and for the first time, the terrifying Alpha King looked shattered. "These are my brother's children," he said, loud enough for the entire compound to hear. "These are the heirs of the Crescent Throne, the royal bloodline of the Northern Kingdom." The whispers grew louder. Wolves turned to each other in confusion and shock. 3 years ago, Theron continued, his voice raw, "my brother, King Aldrich, and his mate, Queen Seraphine, were murdered, assassinated in their own home. Their 6 children were taken. We searched for months. We found nothing. No bodies. No trace. No scent." He gestured to the pups, his hand shaking. "We were told they were dead, that the assassins had killed them and disposed of the bodies where we'd never find them." His golden eyes locked onto Linnea. "Who are you?" Linnea shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. The pups pressed against her legs, whimpering softly. "I don't know," she finally managed. "I don't remember. I was brought here when I was 12. I had no memory of anything before that. Just fragments. A woman singing.
Fire.
Screaming." Theron stood slowly. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and took her wrist again, holding it up so moonlight illuminated the mark. "This," he said, his voice hard now, commanding, "is the blood moon mark. It's only carried by daughters of the original werewolf bloodline. The first pack. The ancient bloodline that gave birth to every alpha line in existence." He looked at the crowd, then back at Linnea. "It's been lost for 200 years. The last known carrier died, without an heir. Or so we believed." Linnea's world tilted. "I don't understand." "You're not an Omega," Theron said firmly. "You never were. You're an Alpha bloodline. Your wolf has been suppressed, locked away, starved into silence." He turned, and his expression transformed into something deadly. His gaze locked onto Ragnar. The Alpha of Thornridge looked like he wanted to disappear. Sweat poured down his face despite the freezing temperature. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "You," Theron said, his voice dropping to a growl that made the air vibrate. "You've been hiding her." "My king, I swear, I had no idea." "Don't."
Lie. To. Me.
Theron crossed the courtyard in 3 strides. Ragnar tried to back away, but 2 of Theron's soldiers materialized behind him, blocking his escape. You knew exactly what she was, Theron snarled. You've been suppressing her wolf, starving her, beating her, keeping her weak, so she couldn't awaken, so she couldn't remember. Ragnar's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Who paid you? Theron demanded. Who told you to keep her here? To keep her broken? I didn't.
Who?
The roar shook snow from the rooftops. Several wolves dropped to their knees instinctively. Ragnar crumbled. The Eastern Syndicate, he gasped. They paid me in silver and weapons. They said she was dangerous, that she could never be allowed to awaken, that the pups had to stay hidden. You knew the pups were alive. It wasn't a question. Ragnar didn't answer. He didn't need to. Theron turned back to Linnea. His expression softened, just slightly. These pups have been waiting for you. They recognized your bloodline, your mark. Even suppressed, even buried, your power called to them. He knelt again, this time in front of her, his golden eyes level with hers. You're not an Omega, Linnea. You're an Alpha bloodline. And these pups have been waiting for you to remember who you are. Linnea looked down at the 6 small wolves pressed against her legs. At Asher's amber eyes. At Kale's blue. At Mira, Orin, Sable, Zephyr. They'd known. All along they'd known. Tears streamed down her face. I don't know how to be what you're saying I am. You don't have to know, Theron said gently. You just have to choose. Come with me. Let me help you awaken. Let me protect you and these pups. Let me bring you home. Home. The word felt foreign. Impossible. Linnea opened her mouth to respond. But before she could speak, Ragnar made a fatal mistake. His hand shot to his belt to the silver whip coiled there. He yanked it free and raised his arm. And that's when everything exploded into chaos. Theron moved faster than anything his size should be able to move. One moment, he was kneeling before Linnea. The next, he was across the courtyard, his hand locked around Ragnar's throat, lifting the Alpha off the ground like he weighed nothing. The silver whip fell from Ragnar's hand and hit the snow with a dull thud. Touch her, Theron growled, his voice barely recognizable as human, and I'll burn this pack to ash. Ragnar choked, his face turning purple. His legs kicked uselessly in the air. Theron's soldiers moved instantly, weapons drawn, surrounding the Thorn Ridge wolves. The betas raised their hands in surrender. The gammas backed away slowly. Even the warriors, trained killers who'd seen countless battles, looked ready to run. But Ragnar's eyes weren't on Theron. They were locked on something behind him, something beyond the walls. And he smiled. Theron saw it. His expression darkened. What did you? Alarms exploded across the compound. Sirens wailed from every watchtower. Red emergency lights flooded the courtyard, turning snow the color of blood. Then the gates exploded. The blast tore through iron and stone, sending chunks of debris flying in every direction. Wolves scattered, screaming. The shockwave knocked several to the ground. Through the smoke and fire, figures poured into the compound.
Dozens of them.
50. Maybe more. They wore black tactical gear, faces covered by masks, bodies armored with reinforced plates. They carried weapons that gleamed silver in the firelight, rifles, blades, grenades. These weren't rogue wolves. These were professionals. Mercenaries. And they were here to kill. Theron dropped Ragnar and spun toward Linnea. Get the pups to the convoy. Now. Linnea didn't think. She dropped to her knees and gathered the 6 pups into her arms. They were small enough to carry if she was careful, if she was fast. Asher pressed against her chest. Kale and Mira tucked under her left arm. Orin and Sable under her right. Zephyr clung to her shoulder. She ran. Behind her, the compound descended into war. Theron's soldiers engaged the mercenaries in brutal close combat. Gunfire cracked through the night. Silver bullets ricocheted off armored vehicles, off stone walls, off flesh. Wolves shifted mid-run, their human forms exploding into fur and claws and teeth. Theron himself shifted. His body erupted in a cascade of black fur and raw power. He grew massive, easily the size of a grizzly bear, his wolf form a nightmare of muscle and rage. His eyes blazed gold. His jaws snapped shut around a mercenary's throat, crushing bone, tearing through armor like paper. Linnea didn't look back. She clutched the pups tighter and sprinted toward the convoy. The vehicles were only 50 yards away.
40.
30. A figure stepped out from behind one of the cars. Linnea skidded to a stop, her boots sliding on ice. The mercenary was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, shoulders like a bull. He carried a rifle loaded with silver bullets, the barrel pointed directly at her chest. "Heirs of the Crescent Throne," he said, his voice muffled by the mask. 40 million silver.
Each.
Linnea took a step back. The pups whimpered against her, trembling. "Please," she whispered. "They're just children. They're targets." He raised the rifle. Linnea didn't think. She twisted her body, putting herself between the gun and the pups, shielding them with her torso, her arms, her life. The mercenary's finger tightened on the trigger. Something inside Linnea snapped. Not broke. Snapped awake. Heat exploded in her chest, racing down her arms, into her hands. The mark on her wrist blazed silver, so bright it lit up the courtyard like a flare. The pups yelped, not in pain, but in recognition. Linnea felt her wolf stir. Not wake.
Not yet.
But move.
Shift.
Press against the cage that had held it prisoner for 11 years. She bared her teeth, human teeth, dull and useless, and lunged. The mercenary wasn't expecting it. He hesitated for half a second, surprised that an Omega would attack. That hesitation cost him. Linnea slammed into him with all her weight, clawing at his face, his throat, his eyes. She had no training, no technique, just desperation and fury and love for the 6 small lives pressed against her chest. Her nails, human, fragile, raked across his mask, tearing it loose. She drove her knee into his stomach. He grunted, stumbling back, and squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide. Silver bullet embedded itself in the side of a vehicle 2 feet from her head. The mercenary recovered fast. He backhanded her across the face with enough force to send her sprawling. She hit the ground hard, pain exploding through her jaw, her vision swimming. The pups tumbled from her arms, scattering across the snow.
No.
Linnea pushed herself up, blood streaming from her nose. The mercenary raised his rifle again, this time aiming at Asher. The mark on her wrist burned hotter. Brighter. No. The word tore from her throat in a voice that wasn't entirely human. And then Theron was there. His massive black wolf form crashed into the mercenary like a freight train. Jaws closed around the man's head. There was a sickening crunch. The body dropped, lifeless. Theron shifted back to human form in seconds, naked and covered in blood, his golden eyes wild. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, crouching beside her. "The pups. I've got them." He scooped up 3 pups in each massive hand and turned toward the convoy. "Stay close to me." They ran together through hell. Explosions rocked the compound. Buildings burned. Wolves fought and died on both sides. Silver bullets cut through the air like lethal rain. Theron's soldiers formed a protective wall around them, firing, shifting, bleeding. They reached the lead vehicle. Theron yanked the door open and shoved Linnea inside, then handed her the pups one by one. She clutched them to her chest, counting frantically. Asher.
Kale.
Mira.
Oren. Sable. Zephyr.
All 6. All alive. Theron slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door. His soldiers piled into the other vehicles. Engines roared to life. "Go, go, go." Theron roared into a radio. The convoy exploded forward. They tore through the burning compound, smashing through debris, running over bodies, mercenary and Thornridge wolf alike. Gunfire pinged off the armored hull. Something exploded behind them, close enough to shake the vehicle. Linnea clutched the pups tighter, whispering to them, promising them safety she wasn't sure she could deliver. Theron drove with one hand on the wheel, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked on the road ahead. His other hand reached across the seat and covered hers. His palm was warm.
Solid.
Real. You fought for them, he said, his voice rough. Even without a wolf. Even knowing you'd die. Linnea's throat tightened. They're all I have. Theron's fingers squeezed hers gently. Not anymore. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning she didn't have the strength to unpack. The convoy sped through the forest, leaving Thornridge behind. Linnea looked back through the rear window one last time. The compound was burning. Flames consumed the great hall, the barracks, the walls. Smoke rose into the night sky like a funeral pyre. Somewhere in that inferno, Ragnar was screaming. But her nightmare was finally over. Or so she thought. Because as they disappeared into the darkness, Linnea didn't see the figure standing on the ridge above the compound. Didn't see the way their eyes glowed red in the firelight. Didn't see the smile that curved beneath their hood. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. As they sped away from Thornridge, Linnea looked back one last time. The compound was burning. And somewhere in that fire, Ragnar was screaming. But her nightmare was finally over. Or so she thought. Shadowmere Fortress rose from the mountains like something carved from night itself. Obsidian towers climbed toward the sky, their surfaces reflecting starlight. The walls were ancient, built by the first wolves centuries ago, reinforced with magic and blood. Snow-capped peaks surrounded the fortress on all sides, creating a natural barrier that made invasion impossible. Above it all, the aurora borealis danced in waves of green and violet, painting the darkness with light that seemed alive. Linnea pressed her face against the vehicle window, clutching the 6 pups in her lap, and felt something she hadn't felt in 11 years. Wonder. The convoy passed through gates that opened without command, past guards in silver armor who snapped to attention as Theron's vehicle approached. When they saw the pups, when they saw their glowing eyes, their impossible colors, recognition rippled through the ranks. One guard dropped to his knee, then another, then dozens. By the time the convoy stopped in the main courtyard, every wolf in sight was kneeling. Theron stepped out first, still shirtless and blood-covered, and offered Linnea his hand. She took it, her legs shaking, and emerged into cold mountain air that tasted clean. An older woman in gray robes approached, her silver hair braided down her back. Her eyes locked onto the pups, and tears streamed down her weathered face. "The lost princes and princesses," she whispered.
Alive.
She fell to her knees. Theron's voice rang across the courtyard. "The heirs have returned. Spread the word to every corner of the northern kingdom. The prophecy has begun." The week that followed felt like a dream Linnea was afraid to wake from. The pups were bathed in warm water, scented with lavender. Their matted fur was brushed until it shone. They were fed roasted meat, fresh bread, cheese that didn't come from garbage. They wore tiny silk cloaks embroidered with a royal crest, a crescent moon encircled by stars. They refused to sleep anywhere but Linnea's room. Linnea herself was given chambers larger than the entire servant quarters at Thornridge. Soft beds, clean clothes, hot food brought on silver trays. Healers examined her scars, treated her malnutrition, wrapped her cracked hands in salve. But the mark on her wrist? That they couldn't explain. Theron visited every evening. He sat with her and the pups, telling stories about his brother. About King Aldrich, who'd been kind and just. About Queen Seraphine, who'd sung lullabies to her children every night. 3 years ago, Theron said one night, firelight casting shadows across his scarred face, they were murdered in their sleep. Assassinated by wolves we never identified. Their 6 children were taken. We searched for months. Found nothing. He looked at the pups curled around Linnea on the floor. We held funerals for empty graves. I became king because there was no one else. And I've spent every day since hunting the ones responsible. The mercenaries at Thornridge, Linnea said quietly. They were sent to finish the job. Yes. But who sent them? Who wanted them dead? Theron's jaw clenched. That's what we're going to find out. He turned to her, his golden eyes intense. There's a prophecy, written 200 years ago by the moon seer. It says, when the blood moon daughter awakens, the lost heirs will return, and the kingdom will be reborn. Linnea's wrist throbbed. I don't understand what that means. It means you're the key. Ragnar was paid to keep you suppressed.
To keep you weak.
To make sure you never awakened your wolf. Because if you did, the prophecy would begin. But I still can't shift. My wolf is still locked, Theron finished. But not dead. I can feel it. So can the pups. You just need time. And safety. Both of which I can give you. On the 7th day, Ragnar was brought before the throne. He was dragged into the great hall in chains, his face bruised, his expensive furs replaced with prisoner rags. His betas and collaborators followed, equally bound. They were forced to their knees before the obsidian throne where Theron sat, crown of silver on his dark hair. But Theron didn't deliver judgment. He turned to Linnea, who stood beside the throne in white robes, the 6 pups at her feet. You suffered under his cruelty for 11 years, Theron said. The choice is yours. What should their punishment be? The hall fell silent. Hundreds of wolves watched. Waited. Ragnar looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. Linnea stepped forward. The pups moved with her, a unified shadow. You took everything from me, she said, her voice steady. My memories. My wolf. My life. You made me believe I was nothing. Ragnar opened his mouth. She raised a hand, and he fell silent. But I'm not nothing. I never was. And neither were the pups you tried to let die. She looked at Theron. Exile them. Strip them of their wolves. Let them live as humans in the territories beyond the kingdom. Let them feel what it's like to be powerless. Gasps rippled through the hall. Stripping a wolf of their wolf was a fate worse than death for most. But it wasn't death. It was mercy. Hard mercy. But mercy nonetheless. Theron stood. So it shall be. Ragnar screamed as the magic took hold, tearing his wolf from his soul. His betas howled. The hall echoed with their anguish. Then guards dragged them away, and silence returned. Theron descended from the throne and walked to Linnea. The entire court watched. He knelt before her. The king of the northern realm knelt before a girl who'd spent 11 years scrubbing floors. Linnea, he said, his voice carrying across the hall. You're not an Omega. You never were. You're the blood moon daughter. The lost heir of the original bloodline. And these 6 pups recognized what everyone else was blind to. He took her hand, his thumb brushing the glowing mark on her wrist. I'm asking you now, in front of my kingdom, to stand beside me. Help me raise these heirs. Help me rebuild what was broken. Be my queen. He looked up at her, golden eyes vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. Be mine. Linnea looked at the man who'd crossed every line for her, who'd burned a compound, who'd killed to protect her, who'd given her choice when she'd never had one before. She looked at the 6 pups sitting at her feet, their glowing eyes fixed on her with absolute trust. She looked at the crowd of wolves watching with hope. Yes. The word was barely a whisper, but it echoed through the hall like thunder. The crowd erupted in cheers. Wolves howled. Fists pounded on stone. The 6 pups threw back their heads and howled in perfect unison, 6 voices blending into one song of joy. Theron stood and kissed her hand, his lips warm against her scarred knuckles. Then he kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. You were never invisible, Linnea, he whispered against her skin. You were just waiting to be seen. The mark on her wrist blazed brighter than it ever had, silver light flooding the hall. And deep in her chest, for the first time in 11 years, her wolf stirred. Not locked anymore. Waking. And that is the incredible story of how one act of kindness changed the fate of an entire kingdom. Linnea thought she was just saving 6 orphan pups. But she ended up saving herself and finding a love written in the stars. It just goes to show that true strength isn't about how loud you can roar. It's about how fiercely you protect the ones who have no voice. If you loved this story of hidden royalty, second chances, and justice served cold, smash that like button. It helps this channel grow and reach more werewolf fiction lovers like you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another epic tale from the pack. Drop a comment below. Would you have fought for the pups, even if it meant risking everything?
I want to know what you think.
Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.
Stay wild, my pack.